واتل ما أوحي إليك من كتاب ربك لا مبدل لكلماته ولن تجد من دونه ملتحدا.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We continue inshallah ta'ala with the tafsir of Surah Al-Kahf, and we stop at verse number 23. So hopefully inshallah ta'ala we can go through 26 inshallah. Verse number 23 from Surah Al-Kahf. يقول الله عز وجل: ولا تقولن لشيء إني فاعل ذلك غدا إلا أن يشاء الله واذكر ربك إذا نسيت وقل عسى أن يهديني ربي لأقرب من هذا رشدا. ولبثوا في كهفهم 300 سنين وازدادوا 9 قل الله أعلم بما لبثوا له غيب السماوات والأرض أبصر به وأسمع ما لهم من دونه من ولي ولا يشرك في حكمه أحدا. The translation: and never say of anything, indeed I will do that tomorrow, except when adding, أن يشاء Allah, if Allah wills. And remember your Lord when you forget, and say, perhaps my Lord will guide me to what is nearer, and this to right conduct, and then this to right conduct. To what is nearer than this to right conduct. And they remained in their cave for 300 years and exceeded by 9. Say, Allah is most knowing of how long they remained. He has knowledge of the unseen aspects of the heavens and the earth. How seeing is He, and how hearing. They have not besides Him any protector, and He shares not His legislation with anyone. So this is the end of the surah after the story of the people of Al-Kahf, after it's mentioned, and some of the great benefits to be learned from this with regards to the fitna, the trial with one's, because of one's religion and holding fast to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addressing the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and generally to the entire ummah. As he says here, rahimahullah, and some of the mufassirin, they mention that the sabab of an-nuzul, or the reason why the surah was revealed to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, that when he was asked about the story of the people of the cave, he said, I will give you an answer tomorrow, but he did not say inshallah. So the wahy was delayed for 15 days, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the surah, and in it saying to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, do not say that I would do something tomorrow except if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will. Regardless, of course, of the authenticity of this, some of the ulama agreed it as da'if, but it's mentioned in the books of the Tafseer. But let's read, inshallah ta'ala. We're more concerned of what's in the Tafsir of Imam Sa'di rahimahullah. He says here, and everyone, inshallah, hopefully you follow what we're reading. وَهَذَا النَّهْيُ كَغَيْرِهِ. This nahi is like the rest of it, the rest of the nahi. Meaning, there's a nahi here. وَلَا تَقُولَنَّ لِشَيْءٍ. Do not say for something that I would do this غَدًا, tomorrow, إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ, except if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will. So what is كَغَيْرِهِ is like the rest of any nahi. Meaning, وَإِن كَانَ لِسَبَبٍ خَاصٍ وَمُوَجَّهٍ لِلرَّسُولِ صلى الله عليه وسلم. If the nahi was for a specific reason, why this nahi was mentioned, and it's muwajjah, it's directed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, فإن الخطاب عام للمكلفين. The khitab, the al-khitab is addressing the subject of this nahi is am, general, to all the mukallafin, all of those who are responsible for their actions, to also for the ummah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So that's why it's كغيره. So this is a rule here that he mentions, that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade, say the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, for something specific, this is not just for the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, this is also for the ummah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, unless there's something else that would specify that it's specifically for the Prophet ﷺ and not other than him. And also the sabab, if it's khas, if the reason was the nahi was for a specific reason, then it's not about the specific reason, it's about the general reasons or means that comes with it, and not just for that individual or for other individual things of that nature. So it becomes general for everyone. So no one is to say, well, that's to the Prophet ﷺ, we're not addressed by this. No, the answer is this is always the qa'idah, the principle when it comes to matters of an-nahi. He says, فَنَهَى اللَّهُ أَنْ يَقُولَ الْعَبْدُ فِي الْأُمُورِ الْمُسْتَقْبَلَةِ. So therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade al-abd, the slave of Allah, to say, يقول في الأمور المستقبلة. المستقبلة is what's ahead of him. Al-mustaqbal is the future, what a person faces in the future. Al-umur matters. To say, إني فاعل ذلك, that I would do such and such, من دون أن يقرنه بمشيئة الله. So the forbiddance here is that a person would say, I would do this, without يقرنه, without attaching. Al-qarin is the one that never leaves the person. So unless you attach to it without leaving it whatsoever, بمشيئة الله, by the will of Allah. وذلك لما فيه من المحذور, because there is محذور here. There is something that is forbidden, or something that a person has to avoid. Al-hadhr is to be warned against, and al-mahdhur is what's warned against. What is al-mahdhur here? وهو الكلام على الغيوب المستقبلة. To say kalam, to say speech about the future غيوب, the future matters, the future unseen, the unseen future. التي لا يدري هل يفعله أم لا. That he doesn't know whether he able to do it or not. No. And this is the case with every future. I mean, we cannot even say what I'm going to do the next second, right? Unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will. So this is, as you will see afterwards, inshallah, this is because of the aqidah. This is how the effect of the aqidah affects one's speech and actions. Because everything is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And a person knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with his names and attributes. So the effect of the aqidah, the adab, the manners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that a person would always attach with it al-mashi'ah, the will of Allah, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will. And as also it's going to be mentioned, and to say inshallah, it's not a way out for a person to be lazy and not to take the means, or to save himself from lying or giving false promises or acting like hypocrites. Of course, this is forbidden also. And that's why when a person says inshallah, he means what he's saying. That means he will, according to the best of his ability, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will, he truthfully going to take the means if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permits. And then the outcome is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. وهو الكلام على الغيوب المستقبلة التي لا يدري هل يفعله أم لا. Whether he is going to do it or no. وهل تكون أم لا, or also he doesn't know if it's going to happen or not. He says also, وفيه رد الفعل, in this statement, this command or this nahi, is to refer the فعل, the action, إلى مشيئة العبد استقلالا. Because if a person says, I would do this tomorrow, I would do this next month, I will do this now, right? That means he's attributing the fi'l, the action, to his own will, to the will of the slave of Allah, the human being. Istiqlalan, that means detached, independent from the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَذَلِكَ مَحْذُورٌ مَحْظُورٌ. This is something to be warned against, and it's forbidden. Mahzur, that means it's forbidden. Mahzur is to be warned against. And you see the difference is dal and dha. Al-hadr is when something is blocked, forbidden, like this. And what is to be careful with the wordings here? We know that al-ibad, the human beings, they have a mashi'ah, they have a will. But their will is not mustaqillah. It's not independent. It's not on its own. Right? Because what overcomes this is the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the mashia of the abd, the mashia, the will of the human being is khaliq or makhluq. A very obvious thing by necessity. It's makhluq. Why? Because the abd is makhluq. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-khaliq. So all of the wills of the human beings, right, is not by itself. It does not create itself. It's all by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will for it to happen, it'll happen. If He doesn't will for it to happen, it's never going to happen. So he says, وَفِيهِ, this is because the nahi is to say إِنِّي فَاعِلٌ ذَلِكَ رَدُّ الْفِعْلِ إِلَى مَشِيئَةِ الْعَبْدِ اسْتِقْلَالًا. This word اسْتِقْلَالًا is very important in this context because we approve, we confirm that the abd has a mashia, of course. وَذَلِكَ مَحْذُورٌ مَحْظُورٌ لِأَنَّ الْمَشِيئَةَ كُلَّهَا لِلَّهِ. Because all of the mashia is to Allah. All of the will is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ رَبُّ الْعَالَمِينَ. You do not will except by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Lord of the Alameen. He says, وَلِمَا فِي ذِكْرِ, also another benefit here. Why this is forbidden to say إِنِّي فَاعِلٌ ذَلِكَ, I will do this and I will do that. وَلِمَا فِي ذِكْرِ مَشِيئَةِ اللَّهِ, and in what mentioning the mashia, the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, مِن تَيْسِيرِ الْأَمْرِ, for the matter to be made easy. وَتَسْهِيلِهِ, and the ease of it, and to be for it to happen and for it to be, while it's happening, it's easy. وحصول البركة فيه, and the barakah to be, the blessings to be attained in it. والاستعانة من العبد ربي, and seeking the help from the slave, and he has this isti'ana in him, seeking help from his Lord Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore, when someone refer the matter to Allah and he says inshallah, that means what? That means this is the strongest way to achieve an action. Not the complete opposite, as some people they think, because of the evil doer, and I would say evil doer, of those who would use inshallah to be a scapegoat for their own laziness and evil actions. Because when you say inshallah, right, that means what? That means you're seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to establish and to be upon what you're saying that you want to do, because it's in the future. And only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best if a person is going to be alive, if he's be given the energy to do it, if all the circumstances will be there. So when he's seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is the type of a person that you trust, supposed to be. And you would believe him truthfully because he's seeking help from Allah, and he's seeking the blessings from Allah for the matter to be made easy for him. And if someone says, I will do something without saying inshallah, then you stay away from that person. Then you have doubts, right? Even with the blessings of one's actions. But you see how the shaitan can make the matter completely the opposite when people misuse something like inshallah. So as you see here, matters of belief by referring the action to the will of Allah, because the abd does not have the will istiqlalan, independent from the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, وَلَمَّا كَانَ الْعَبْدُ بَشَرًا, and since as a fact that al-abd, the human being, abd is bashar, so the human being is a human being, that means is by default. When you say that we are bashar, as the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ, and as the ayah says, and some of the hadith, إِنَّمَا أَنَا عَبْد. Abd, bashar, that means you are by default what? Many things. That means you don't have to prove that these might happen to you and not others. No, just being a abd, being a human being, لابد أن يسهو عن ذكر المشيئة. There has to happen that sometimes that he would forget. This is how the human beings, mu'min, the believer, non-believer, everyone, we are created to have this. We forget. We overlook many things many times. It doesn't matter how good you are. So since he لابد أن يسهو عن ذكر المشيئة, and therefore also that he might overlook or forget to say the mashia, to mention the mashia, inshallah, أمره الله أن يستثني بعد ذلك إذا ذكر. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered him, if he remembers, to mention the mashia. So that's why إلا أن يشاء الله واذكر ربك إذا نسيت, and make remembrance of your Lord if you forgot. So he says ليحصل المطلوب, for what you're seeking to be attained. ويندفع المحذور, and what you're warned against and what you fear to be pushed away. So if someone did not say inshallah because he forgot, if he remembers, then he should say inshallah. And in general, as he's going to mention also, so whether وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ إِذَا نَسِيت is related to saying inshallah, if you forgot to say it, then say it when you remember, or it's a separate sentence by itself at all times. That means always make remembrance of your Lord whenever you forget anything, in general. So that's why he says here, وَيُؤْخَذُ مِنْ عُمُومِ قَوْلِهِ. We take from the umum. Al-umum is the general meaning of, or the general statement of وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ إِذَا نَسِيت. So there's general statement وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ إِذَا نَسِيت, not being attached to the previous sentence. The umum here, the generality of the command here, الْأَمْرُ بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ عِنْدَ النِّسْيَانِ. The command here to make remembrance of Allah عند النسيان, whenever there's forgetting something, when a person forget, to make remembrance of Allah. فإنه يزيله, because that the remembrance of Allah removes it. ويذكر, and also it reminds the abd ما سهى عنه, it reminds the abd what he forgot or overlooked. وكذلك يؤمر الساهي الناسي لذكر الله, and also الساهي الناسي, the one that forgets, the one that made a mistake, he forgot something. And السهو والنسيان, they are synonyms. And sometimes a sahw is that a person, it's a forgetfulness, that or a person that he falls in it as a result of not paying attention, versus he forgot something in the past. So الساهي الناسي يؤمر, he's to be commanded لذكر الله, to make remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, أن يذكر ربه ولا يكونن من الغافلين, that he make remembrance of his Lord and not to be from the غافلين, the forgetful ones. So الساهي الناسي here لذكر الله, right? Not الساهي الناسي in general. So the one, so to make sure that there's different points mentioned here. So واذكر ربك إذا نسيت, related to inshallah. If you remember inshallah, say inshallah. The second thing that he mentioned here is, in general, whenever you forget something, mention the name of Allah, make remembrance of Allah. It will help the person to remember. A third point here, the one that is sahi nasi, someone that is in state of forgetfulness. He's not making dhikr of Allah. He's too much engaged into the dunya matters and things like this, right? He is also commanded to make remembrance of Allah and not to be from the ghafilin, because the ayah also apply for such an individual. وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ إِذَا نَسِيتَ. You're busy with something and you're getting engaged into it so much, then whenever you remember, you all of a sudden you get this awakening. Oh, I did not make dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a long time. Make a dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the salawat al-khams, the 5 daily prayers, and the morning and the evening afkar, and so on, put the person in the right track when it comes to the away from the ghafla. He says, another one, ولما كان العبد مفتقرا إلى الله في توفيقه. Since the abd, the human being, is always in need of Allah, مفتقرا إلى الله في توفيقه, in guiding him to do what is correct, للإصابة. الإصابة here meaning to do what is right, to hit the target, to be on the point. وعدم الخطأ, and to be away from mistakes في أقواله وأفعاله, in his speech and actions. أمره الله أن يقول, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered him to say, عسى أن يهديني ربي لأقرب من هذا رشدا. He ordered him that to say that maybe, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide me, my Lord, لأقرب من هذا رشدا, to what's nearer into al-rashad and what's upright and what's correct. So what does that mean? فأمره أن يدعو الله, that he ordered him to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ويرجوه, and that he hope for the rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ويثق به, and he have trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, أن يهديه, that he will guide him, لأقرب الطرق, to the closest paths, الموصلة إلى الرشد, that leads the person to al-rushd, which is uprightness and what's correct. So this is how a person, when he would make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and when a person is asked, as Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, he says, When a person is asked about something that he doesn't know, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide you to what is correct, right? And also other meanings to this. So this is also important, as the ayah says, واذكر ربك إذا نسيت وقل عسى أن يهديني ربي لأقرب من هذا رشدا. So to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to make sure that you do what is right, because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not guide you, no one else other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide you. He says, وَحَرِيٌّ بِعَبْدٍ تَكُونُ هَذِي حَالُ. If a abd, this is his affairs, حَرِيٌّ بِهِ, that means he's ought to be. If someone is like this, and we need to go back again and reflect all of these stages, all of these means for the person to be upon, ثُمَّ يَبْذُلُ جُهْدَهُ, then he put the best effort that he have, وَيَسْتَفْرِغُ وُسْعَهُ, وسع capacity. يستفرغ, that means when you make إفراغ, that means that you pour, that means that you do the best you can to the best of your capacity. The capacity refers to a volume, right? Physically. So يستفرغ وسعه, what is your capacity? How much can you take? In which if you add more, you will break. You won't be able to make it. So to do the best that a person will have. And this is another thing, is when it comes to, as he says, في طلب الهدى والرشد, in seeking guidance and rushd. Seeking guidance in every matter and with every breath we take. Say for example, the salah. What is your capacity to perfect your salah? Physically, you're fit, right? So what is the capacity that you have? You can go to the masjid. You can go early. You have the capacity to go early to pray your sunnah. You have the capacity to do this. You have the capacity to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to have khushu', to remove all the distractions. The question here is, هل بذلت جهدك واستفرغت وسعك? Like these two statements here. Did you put the effort to the best of your ability to achieve this act of guidance? Did you bring forth all of what's in your capacity to seek the guidance and what is right? Or you just gave some of the effort, some means, and you're not really truthfully fulfilled what it needed from you? And of course, we as human beings, we are tested. There are certain things, and this is almost every human being, they have this, unless someone has some issues, that there are some things where you would find yourself, you put the best of your effort to achieve something that you like, something that you're inclined to do. So this becomes a test for us or against us. Are we doing the same thing with what's pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Right? So, and that's where the ubudiyah to Allah. This is where the ibadah becomes, a person becomes abd to Allah. Not like the ones that the religion is according to what they feel. They feel the closeness to Allah, they feel energetic and feel, mashallah, very good, so that they would go to the salah, they go to the salah. Or they would give charity, or whatever. They don't feel good, they don't do anything. That's not ubudiyah to Allah, this is following the desires. What really matters is when a person in his downtime, if it's correct to say, or he does not feel as energetic, does he fulfill the obligations? And this is where the area or the time or the situation that a person has to work on oneself. When a person is alone, when nobody's watching him, when, things of that nature. So these are all ways to train oneself. And the ayah teaches us this. As he says, أن يوفق لذلك, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide him, and he makes dua, because since everything is by Allah and the tawfiq is from Allah, even the feeling to be able to give the best that a person has is all from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore the person would turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sincerely. وأن تأتيه المعونة من ربه, and that the help, المعونة, comes to him from his Lord. وأن يسدده في جميع أموره, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make him do what is right. As sadad is to do the best you can, that you hit the target in all of his affairs. All of that we learn from these verses, and how the importance of insha'Allah. Insha'Allah is a life-changing thing if we really know what we're saying. So, an-nahi, forbidden from saying, I will do this, I will do that. Person would say, but I'm working with people that are non-Muslims. They won't understand what I'm saying. It doesn't matter if they understand or not. But your speech, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is hearing it and He is seeing what you're doing. Do you have to say inshallah and they might think that you're cursing them because you said something in a different language? You can say inshallah and you can translate it. You don't have to say inshallah if they don't understand the meaning of it, but you can say if Allah wills, right? Or God willing or whatever. That's fine. If someone that doesn't understand, even though it's best is to say inshallah and then you translate it. They think that this is you're putting religion into whatever context of things. Let them think whatever they think. You know, this is how things has to be. And a person, and with all due respect, if a person chooses to be in an environment, he has to be patient with the deen of Allah, right? You're not being oppressed. If you're oppressed, then find a place where you're not oppressed, so that you practice your deen of Allah. That to practice the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a Muslim does not accept oppression. If he's oppressed and he has the means to go somewhere where he's not oppressed, then this is an obligation upon him. If he is oppressed really and he does not have any mean, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most forgiver, and therefore a person is excused in this case. But to choose as they say, to accept ad-daniyya fi din, to accept to choose the humiliation one's religion, that a person is shy to show his identity, so shy of being proud of being a Muslim, right? And this is something that is a disease in the heart. So illa an yasha Allah, I will do this tomorrow, inshallah. I will do this next month, inshallah. وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ إِذَا نَسِيتَ, as we said, connected to what's before and also in general, that it has so many different applications in it. Always making dhikr of Allah. And one of which is whenever you forget something or when you are in state of forgetfulness. Take yourself out of the state of forgetfulness by making dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And وَقُلْ عَسَىٰ أَن يَهْدِيَنِي رَبِّي لِأَقْرَبَ مِنْ هَذَا رَشَدًا. And make this type of a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide to the closest matters, to the matter of guidance and rashad, which is to do things in the right way. Rashad is when you do something and you do it right and you do it in the most perfect way. And some said that the tawbah, the repentance from forgetting to say inshallah, to say this dua. Right? So if he forgot to say inshallah and then he remembered later, because it says here, وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ إِذَا نَسِيتَ وَقُلْ عَسَىٰ أَن يَهْدِيَنِي رَبِّي لِأَقْرَبَ مِنْ هَذَا رَشَدًا. If you take the whole sentence as related to forgetting to say inshallah, so someone said, I will do this tomorrow, and then he forgot to say inshallah. When he remembers, he should say, inshallah, I will do it. And then he says right after this, عَسَىٰ أَن يَهْدِيَنِي رَبِّي لِأَقْرَبَ مِنْ هَذَا رَشَدًا. That maybe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide me towards closer matters of al-rashad and matters of goodness. So this is also one of the benefits to learn from this. And everything is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is for the entire ummah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, and it's istithna, it's exception. And there are many different rulings when it comes to matters of al-yameen. If someone swears by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he says, insha'Allah, does that mean that he does not expiate for his oath if he says, insha'Allah? There's details to this, of course. If he says the yameen and the yameen of something in the future, saying insha'Allah does not make him relieved from expiating for the oath, right? So, because everything is by the will of Allah. And as we know that if you say, Wallahi, I will visit you, insha'Allah, right? You say insha'Allah, but does that mean, insha'Allah, I will visit you? A person says, Wallahi, by Allah, I will visit you tomorrow, right? Is it permissible? Yes. He says insha'Allah. But then he swears by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He comes tomorrow and he is sick, he's not able to do it. What should he do? He should expiate for the sin. Is he sinful? No, he's not. He was not able to do it, and that's why don't make it tight for yourself, right? To be at ease. So this is also with matters of the oath. And then after that, the verses talks about وَلَبِثُوا فِي كَهْفِهِمْ 300 سَنِينَ وَازْدَادُوا 9. But maybe we should stop here so that we make sure that we get this meanings clear, inshallah ta'ala, because this is something that is Muslims are very known with this, inshallah, and the issue of even with our children, as some mentioned, once the child hears inshallah, that means it's not going to happen. You find even sometimes children would say, no, don't say inshallah, because they tried their parents before. They say inshallah and they don't fulfill their promises. So we raise them to be have these weaknesses in their hearts when it comes to the Mashiach of Allah. It's supposed to be the opposite. But for them to understand, yes, because it's in the future. What if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not give us the ability? So this is different, and that's why we have to say always inshallah. And if it comes where we're supposed to fulfill what we promised and we're not able to, or something else is better than what we promised, then there's nothing wrong with that. And a person being truthful and seeking the help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and seeking and believing in the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we'll stop here inshallah ta'ala, and again I would read it one time, since we've been supposed to be do this inshallah, to follow all of the words that are mentioned. And of course there are many great benefits to learn from this, and for us to attain the barakah of the tafsir is to apply it in our life and not to forget, right? So that's why it needs to be always repeated. So I will read the tafsir inshallah, so follow inshallah what's mentioned here. يقول هذا النهي كغيره وإن كان لسبب خاص وموجه للرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم فإن الخطاب عام للمكلفين. فنهى الله أن يقول العبد في الأمور المستقبلة إني فاعل ذلك من دون أن يقرنه بمشيئة الله، وذلك لما فيه من المحذور، وهو الكلام على الغيوب المستقبلة التي لا يدري هل يفعله أم لا، وهل تكون أم لا، وفيه رد الفعل إلى مشيئة العبد استقلالا، وذلك محذور محظور، لأن المشيئة كلها لله، وما تشاءون إلا أن يشاء الله رب العالمين. ولما في ذكر مشيئة الله من تيسير الأمر وتسهيله وحصول البركة فيه والاستعانة من العبد لربه. ولما كان العبد بشرا لابد أن يسهو عن ذكر المشيئة، أمره الله أن يستثني بعد ذلك إذا ذكر، ليحصل المطلوب ويندفع المحذور. ويؤخذ من عموم قوله واذكر ربك إذا نسيت الأمر بذكر الله عند النسيان، فإنه يزيله ويذكر العبد ما سهى عنه، وكذلك يؤمر الساهي الناسي لذكر الله أن يذكر ربه ولا يكونن من الغافلين. ولما كان العبد مفتقرا إلى الله في توفيقه للإصابة وعدم الخطأ في أقواله وأفعاله، أمره الله أن يقول عسى أن يهديني ربي لأقرب من هذا رشدا، فأمره أن يدعو الله ويرجوه ويثق به أن يهديه لأقرب الطرق الموصلة إلى الرشد، وحري بعبد تكون هذه حاله، ثم يبذل جهده ويستفرغ وسعه في طلب الهدى والرشد أن يوفق لذلك، وأن تأتيه المعونة من ربه، وأن يسدده في جميع أموره. So also just a reminder for the last two lines here when it says وحري بعبد تكون هذه حاله. So all of what's mentioned before, if a person is upon that of what's mentioned, to make remembrance of Allah and inshallah and so on, then he put the best of his effort and the best of his energy and capacity, then hariyun bihi, that means he ought to be then successful and to be guided to do things in the right way. So the ayat gives us exactly how to be helped to do what is best for oneself by fulfilling these steps clearly as it's stated in the verse. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from those who are guided and steadfast upon the deen of Allah. The attendance code is insha'Allah. The attendance code is insha'Allah. طيب بارك الله فيكم وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.